Hello, hello, and welcome to Collaboraction Radio. We're here at the intersection of art, activism, and social change. That was the sounds of DJ Lady D, the queen of Chicago house music. She was at DJing at Pritzker Pavilion last night over at Millennium Park. And if you haven't heard the big news, DJ Lady D, also known as Darlene Jackson, has been named as Collaboraction's new executive director. How about that? And you can go back and listen to DJ Lady D here on Collaboration Radio. I think it's like episode 32 or something, but this is episode 61. And we have a very special guest in the house, and we're going to be talking about all kinds of things, including tiny homes. But wait, before we get to that, you are here September 21st, if you're listening live in 2024 at 4:06 p.m. on WCPT 820 AM, Chicago's progressive talk radio, where Collaboration comes together every Saturday at 4 p.m. Central. And if it's not September 21st, 2024, that's because you're in the future. Hello, in the future. This is the past. And you are podcasting us, aren't you? Or you're watching YouTube. You're getting us from Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your digital stuff. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Anthony Mosley. I'm Collaboraction's artistic director. Collaboration is a 28-year-old nonprofit whose mission is to build knowledge, empathy, dialogue, and action. And we do that through telling stories, a lot of them nonfiction, a lot of them inspired by real events in our real lives. And then we let the storytelling cultivate and inspire new knowledge and empathy, dialogue, and action. And we are talking to somebody who has today inspired a lot of knowledge, empathy, dialogue, and action. And that's Tracy Baim. And Tracy's in the studio, and we're going to get to her in just a moment. But first, Collaboration Radio is sponsored by the Joseph and Bessie Feinberg Foundation. And today's episode is sponsored by AV Chicago, Chicago's leading provider of AV production and event management services. If you have the event and you need the gear and the tech geniuses, AV Chicago has got them at the ready. Tell them Collaboration Radio sent you. And, and if you're a nonprofit, tell them you want the nonprofit rate. You can ask for Jeremy at AV Chicago and tell him I sent you. We're also sponsored by Elevoke. Elevoke. It's elevate and evoke together. It's a new word. Henry likes it. Elevoke. That's ELOVOQUE. We're making up words here in the 21st century. Elevoke is a purpose-driven destination and event management company, and they seek to become a trusted strategic ally to your business. And I went to their launch party this week at Resolution Studios, and let me tell you, it was a event planner's utopia. They pulled together so many wonderful, bespoke little experiences that I can tell you they have a whole portfolio of things that they can do for your special event or meeting. So check them out at elevoque.com. That's ELOVOQUE.com. And, if you listen to the show right now, hello, or later, and you feel impassioned and you want to be part of the conversation, or you want to sponsor the show or send over a PSA and be part of the platform, you can do that by emailing radio@collaboration.org, or just go to www.collaboration.org to learn more. Follow us on all the social platforms, and thank you for joining us. Collaboration updates. Well, first of all, let me share that we are back in the rehearsal studio creating an updated version of our show, Moonset Sunrise. I just came from rehearsal today, and Moonset Sunrise is a piece of healing theater. Collaboration has been doing some work around truth and reconciliation, and what does that look like? What does acknowledging the harm of our history and then trying to reconcile around that? What does that look like in Chicago, a city that has been so marked by oppression, racism, classism, redlining, inequitable distribution of education resources and grocery stores and trees and pharmacies? Well, during the pandemic, when we asked ourselves that question, the answer was the first step to racial healing is self-care. And why don't we create a show that takes us all on a journey to first let go of things that don't serve us, forgive ourselves, our neighbors, maybe our parents, and then, once you release that stuff, you can make room for some new stuff. So that's what Moonset Sunrise is. It's led by Pilar O'Dane, who's a Yoruba priestess, and it's more of a kind of a music show with some spirituality in it. It features my wife and Collaboration founding company member, Sandra Delgado, who sure talk about a lot on this show. She's in it, and so is Willie Round. And we're doing it at Theater Y in North Lawndale at 3611 West Cermak, which is a really, really wonderful venue and space and company. And it's a landmark building that was like a storage facility, and they turned the loading dock into a theater. And if that isn't full of metaphors, I don't know what is. So Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, September 27th, 28th, and 29th, the show is free. There's a meal at every show. And then Dr. Marcus Robinson in the Wild Onion, that's the name of the band. Of course, some of you probably know. Chicago comes from Chicawa, which was the... I'm going to just say the Indians, the local tribes, Council of Three Fires. That's what they called the land because of the wild onions. And I say that because I don't know if you ever heard the George Carlin bit. And I was thinking about George Carlin. I thought, what would George Carlin say about the name Tiny Homes? Who came up with that name? And what does it mean to you? It's a really interesting thing because people come up with these names and then they stick forever. George Carlin said Native Americans. Why do we call them Native Americans? First of all, they weren't native to this land. They came from other places across the, they came from like Asia through Alaska. And how can they be native of something that was named by a colonizer? This is not native. You can't say Native America, and then America is the place that came and changed the name. When actually Indian means Indios, of God. So, just sometimes I say, what would George Carlin say? And if nothing else, it makes me think about language. So, Moonset Sunrise, September 27th, 28th, and 29th at Theater Y. That's Collaboration's production. You can come for free. There's a Google form on our website or on our social media platforms, and you can sign up or just show up. And then the Utopian Ball, our annual gala, is November 2nd at Venue West. And we are embracing the theme of a paradise island. Because in Chicago, as the days get shorter, you start to go, wow, if I close my eyes and imagine I'm at a beach somewhere, everything's a little bit better. No, not really. We just thought it would be fun to embrace. It might have something to do with the fact that I've been working in Maui a little bit, and I just got back from a trip to Maui. But it also might have something to do with our friends at the Hua Momona Foundation, who are helping to sponsor the gala this year. So join us at the Utopian Ball. You can still get a ticket and sponsor a table or sponsor the event, or volunteer. Go to collaboraction.org to learn more. We are also building our new House of Belonging in Humboldt Park. We are navigating the Department of Buildings permit process, and we will be breaking ground shortly. And you can learn more about that at our website. And like I said, we just announced this week that Darlene Jackson will become our CEO and Executive Director. And then Beverly Dines is our new COO and Managing Director. And I am now the Artistic Director / CPO, which, of course, if you're of a certain age, you think of C3PO. But I'm the Chief Programming Officer now. So at least, after 25 years, my 25-year anniversary is in October, I got a new title. So that's great. Now I'm a chief of something. And what would George Carlin say about that? I'm going to just put that right there. But next week, actually, we're going to play back a new podcast, a special version of Collaboraction Radio. That's a discussion with me, Darlene, and Beverly about the new triumvirate leadership and what we hope to do in our first 90 days and what this new era of Collaboraction might look like. It's in my head, I count the eras, and there's 9 of them. This is the beginning of the 9th era. And I think I have to do that to just, convince myself to keep on going because it's a new era. And I just kid, actually. Things have gotten a lot better in the last 10 years than they were in the beginning. And that's because I think, we changed our mission to focus on social change and social action, and that it really makes sense as a nonprofit. You have to ask yourself, what value do you bring the community? And Tracy Baim also has some experience with that after just actually leading the Chicago Reader through a process of becoming a nonprofit. And she did, by the way, go up against a billionaire and won. So do not think that you can beat her in anything with money. You're going to have probably a lot of heart. And even then, you might be better to convince her to join you or join her as more likely the outcome. And if you want to call in today, you can do that at 773-763-WCPT. That's 773-763-9278 if you want to join live while we have a little conversation. Tracy Baim, welcome to Collaboration Radio. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me.
I'm going to read, doing the bio read.
Please don't read my bio.
Can I just read part of it? Come on. So I took some stuff out. It's such a good bio.
My dad's listening. He's going to say it was too much.
Tracy Baim is a total rock star. She's been kicking booties for a long time in the positive direction. She's a journalist, author, and editor since 1984. And she's the co-founder and majority owner of Windy City Times and the past publisher of the Chicago Reader. She's a major LGBTQ history and journalism expert and activist. Her coverage of the movement of gay rights has been noted as epic and kind of also, it's very meta. She's an activist for her coverage of the movement itself. And in 2013, the Chicago Headline Club Lifetime Achievement Award winner. And then in 2014, she was inducted into the National LGBT Journalists Association Hall of Fame. And she was inducted in 2018 alongside her late mother, Joy Darrow, into the Association of Women Journalists, Chicago's inaugural Women's Journalism Hall of Fame. I could go on and on and on. Robert Feder named her to his top 20 women in Chicago journalism list. She's the real deal. And she's also the director of the Tiny Home Summit 2.0, which was a project of Pride Action Tank, an initiative of AIDS Foundation of Chicago. And the Pride Action Tank launched in October of 2015 to bring together and support the works of subject matter experts, as well as people directly impacted by challenges facing LGBTQ plus communities to envision and realize practical longer-term policy solutions. Pride Action Tank fuels collaborations among organizations, departments, experts, policymakers, and community members to fill in gaps and ensure better support for all the people in the LGBTQ plus communities. And so if you know Collaboraction and what we're all about, then you know how honored and excited we are to have Tracy on the show. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I would be remiss not to say that Kim Hunt helped me found Pride Action Tank, and she's been the executive director since it was founded in 2015. I wish she had been able to be here today, but she was enormously important in the Tiny Home Summit as well.
So let's start with tiny homes, because I think there's a lot of people that are still going, tiny homes, really? And yet, in 2024, with both the rised awareness of homelessness and the vulnerability of our homeless, and coming out of the pandemic and what that meant to the community that is underhoused, how did you first get introduced to the concept? And I know it's been a little while, and tell us about the narrative of the rise of tiny homes in the consciousness of Chicagoans and Americans, and where you see it going.
The work I've done on the tiny homes came out of a youth homeless summit that Windy City Times hosted in the year leading up to the founding of Pride Action Tank. Kim Hunt and I had worked hard on marriage equality in the state, and I had promised a lot of activists that I didn't really care about marriage equality. I just wanted to get it out of the way, and that we would work on another issue coming up. And Windy City Times had done a series called Generation Halsted, exploring the racism on Halsted Street related to the youth that were living on the streets. So out of that, we did a summit on youth homelessness in around 2014. And many solutions came out of that, including the Chicago Youth Storage Initiative, which funders came together to do and put over 700 locking devices into youth shelters. But tiny homes was also mentioned at the summit as a possible solution. And the youth really, a lot of the youth really loved the concept of living in an independent home, freestanding, with their own mail slot, their own lock, own showers and bathroom. So what we did was we partnered with the American Institute of Architects Chicago chapter and Alphawood Foundation to run a competition for providing housing to youth of college age who were homeless, and in particular maybe for community college students. We had youth that were advisors on the project, and we had over 250 incredible designs entered from around the world. The winning design was built on site outside our first Tiny Home Summit in 2016, appropriately on the land right next to the Jane Addams Hell House. That summit was terrific, but and really well attended. But the problem is a lot of the policies were in the way, zoning and building codes and all sorts of things. So we didn't hold Sol Flores and I, she was at La Casa Norte at the time, we were actually looking to do a development for La Casa Norte youth that go to school at one of the community colleges on 63rd Street. So we were very close to getting an RFI approved from the city of Chicago, and then Rahm Emanuel decided not to run. So we took it up again with the Lightfoot administration, made some progress, then Lightfoot loses, and then Brandon Johnson comes in, and we started to get a lot of requests for information on tiny homes because of the migrant crisis. So I felt like there had been a critical mass reached, and I got the approval from Kim and Pride Action Tank to put on the second Tiny Home Summit this past June. If folks want to know more about it, there's a website, chicagotinyhomes.com/2024, where the full report and all the videos are also on the Windy City Times YouTube channel. The exciting part about where we're at right now is that I think it's no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of when. The City of Chicago Homeless SARS has said that there will be an RFP at some point soon on tiny home project in Chicago. We know that we had a tiny home model on site this time that was built by Tim Swanson and his team of Inherent Homes in North Lawndale. They build pre-manufactured housing, and they're ready to go. They're ready to go with the development. And let me just say this about tiny homes. They are not the solution to homelessness or affordable housing or even wealthy housing, right? But they need to be added to the plate, to the menu. Right now, some of those barriers are number of units of independent freestanding homes on a city lot. Obviously, NIMBY is always a barrier. The hookups that are needed to city water lines and gas lines, et cetera, prohibitive if you're having to not being able to combine them. So, but they're all overcomeable. A city of Evanston is looking to be more progressive on smaller footprint homes. Tiny homes, as you said with George Carlin, it's just a gimmick name. It's something that happens. There's tiny home TV shows, you name it. Tim Swanson likes to call them mighty homes. I don't care what you call them smaller footprint homes. They're basically small homes that are like studio apartments. I like to say that we already have tiny homes in the city of Chicago. They're just vertical. We need independent freestanding tiny homes because it's another kind of model. We had our home up in North Lawndale for about a year, the last time we did the summit. I would sit out there on Saturday mornings, and I cannot tell you, we did this for youth, and we brought youth and other homeless folks from the viaducts and other places around the city. But as I was sitting there on every Saturday morning, the people that made me cry were the seniors and the veterans, because they said, when can I move in? I could stay in this neighborhood, and I would have lower utility costs. I would have the dignity of independent. I wouldn't have to, share hallways with strangers. I could live in a bungalow-type home that was just a little bit smaller than the bungalow I grew up in. These homes are necessary for Chicago to address so many needs. There are economic, environmental, dignity, you name it, and they can be built permanent and beautiful. Some cities do this kind of temporary, but there are cities that presented at our summit: Dallas, Austin, and Seattle, and San Francisco. There are 4 of the cities in the United States that do it. The Austin plan is unbelievable. They have hundreds of independent homes, and most of them have their own complete shower and bathroom. Some of them are shared. And their model is, some are 3D built, some are stick built, some are RVs, all kinds of models. It's a little Mayberry. When I visited in February, I felt like I was walking through a small town in 1950s but all kinds of people, mostly over 55, who were so happy to finally have a place to live with dignity.
Beautiful. I mean, I love the idea of the community that can be fostered in with an efficient use of resources and land, and I mean, a lot of folks, they get a little older. They look it's called downsizing. You want to have one level, no stairs, and you want to be efficient. Why not? A smaller footprint home. What are the costs of a tiny home range, just in the building of the home, not the land?
Right, the land and the infrastructure really do matter. So we're talking with a group in Englewood right now. We're looking at city lots, right? So if we can get the land for free, the real cost there then is going to be to make the land ready, right? So you got all that prep work, but that's a one-time mostly thing. Really depends on how you build them. Tim Swanson in North Lawndale is looking at probably an 80,000 range pre-built in off-site, right? Because if you build off-site in a manufactured controlled environment, you save a ton on labor. And so then you move them to the site. And tiny homes are perfect for moving these houses, right? I've seen multi-ton homes moved, right?
Yeah.
So this is nothing to move. And so you could also do container homes. We had a container home folk from the suburbs in Chicago that want to be doing container housing. So that it's neutral to the materials and where you build them, how you build them. Like I said, there's 3D printing of cement homes. But when you can scale this, you can definitely get the cost under $100,000 a unit, and maybe even half that, and make them permanent, beautiful, dignified. So right now in Chicago, a lot of these, vertical buildings you build for affordable housing, each unit can cost $300,000-$400,000 because the layers of funding and bureaucracy and all the infrastructure, the elevators and elevators, by the way, that have a difficult time getting repaired, and in affordable housing, often the big air conditioning and other units go out. So you have less cost to run these things. You can if you do it right on the front end, you can make them environmentally net zero. So the cost of operations and everything can be pretty neutral, and the repairs and the upkeep and such. So there's no exact one size fits all, but if you scale this and give you an example, 5 city lots, you could put 20 units of tiny homes on a 5-city lot that are about 350 square feet each, and have a small community center of about 1,600 square feet. And that's no different than maybe building a 4-story, 5-story building, but the cost of doing it and maintaining it and the dignity associated with it are different.
And in Chicago, where you have so many neighborhoods that have been impacted by racism, redlining. Even the West Side is burning. The fires around the riots of the '60s that left all these empty lots, abandoned lots. We even have, you remember when they put up the red X's on the homes, and they then I think there was a fire and some firemen got injured, maybe even killed going into a home. So then they got federal funding to put these red X's on homes to tell emergency responders that the home might be dangerous. Well, they ran out of money for the federal program, and then they just left the red X's on them, and only a small portion of percentage of the homes have actually gotten the red X taken off. We have all these, and I'm saying that the communities have been impacted negatively, and here's an idea that maybe could actually utilize some of those lots. Well,
not only those lots, but so we're looking at a lot of seniors who live in neighborhoods that are not very resourced, right? Could they? And there's some great activists working on getting the accessory dwelling unit law going from the 10 wards now to all 50 wards, and that probably will happen this year. What that means is a senior could build a tiny home on their back for either for them to live in and then rent out the front, or vice versa. So that's income to stay living in an accessible space that they build, and they can keep the income on the front property. But also by building these kind of units in multiple lots, you do allow people that grew up in a neighborhood to stay in that neighborhood, to either own or rent at affordable prices. So it can not one size fits all, but there's so many potential uses for this. And we don't want to say they're less than, right? It's for people who want this. They should never be forced. If you've got a family of four and an apartment or a condo is the best solution, tiny homes may not work for you. But we need more housing, period. And I'm very optimistic if the Democrats win, that there will be billions more dollars into HUD and housing in this country. So we need some shovel-ready stuff in Chicago area. I know that there are 3 projects that the Illinois Department of Housing Financing Agency, IDA, has financed for tiny homes, 2 for veterans, 1 for the medically infirm outside of the Chicago area. So Chicago needs to get its act together, because not only are we behind, but we have a chance to be best. Chicago is the #1 city in the country where tiny homes can be done at scale and have a significant impact with thousands of new units, whether they're accessory dwelling or on empty city lots. I say that because we have the weather. Houston has land, but they have horrible weather and things would be underwater. They'd put all these in bad areas and be drowning. Detroit has a lot of land, but they don't have the transit and the infrastructure we do. And of course, California and New York don't have the land. Chicago has everything to make this work here and make them great for the winter, great from the summer. And I just don't understand why we are not looking to do this at scale. We have spent millions and millions of dollars on the migrant crisis, right? How many homes could we have built? And how many trainings could we have done for migrants to build them, and for youth to build them, and to work with the unions and the big construction companies to use these as training ground? There's just so many levels. The report has a summary in front of it that I really encourage, if you're interested in knowing more, on the chicagotinyhomes.com/2024 website. The report and the videos will really give you the summary of why this is a good idea. Again, not for all, but for some.
I'm so glad we're talking about this here on WCPT, Chicago's progressive talk radio, because this is the kind of innovative idea that progressives tend to push forward when they understand them. And, so just to be clear, these homes have a kitchen, they have, showers and bathrooms. I mean, the pandemic...
And let me just say this, they can be ADA accessible, which is critical, because so many people who've been on the streets as they get older, are disabled. So we have to, on the front end, understand who the audience is, and they can be made ADA accessible with not much additional work.
And what does that look like? Is it a lift or just a little ramp to get in, and railings and...
Well, making sure the bathroom is wheelchair accessible and designed ADA accessible. Depending on how the city is going to have these work, yes, a ramp, obviously, to get in. But they're basically a one level, right?
Yeah.
Some tiny homes that you design are like there's a loft and such. Well, obviously that wouldn't work for some of these. So I'm just saying, look at the end user. So if it's going to be a supportive housing community, or permanent supportive, or temporary, or shelter, whoever that audience is, we have to make sure it's ADA accessible.
And I imagine they're probably putting solar panels on these, and
yep,
right.
A lot of people live off the grid in these around the country, and that's what a lot of these tiny homes show. They're not, but we don't see that in Chicago. These are not mobile homes. These are not temporary. These need to be permanent. That may work in places around the country that are warm all the time, but in Chicago, we need to make these permanent and be on a cement slab, follow the code to make sure they're safe throughout our winds and our winters, and you can make those at one level.
And, you said the Austin site. Tell us more about that.
So Mobile Loaves and Fishes is an incredible group. It started as a religious community and support years ago to feed the homeless, and then they started moving into housing. They have, I believe, over 500 units now, and they're tripling their size in the next few years. They finally got HUD to allow them to use vouchers there. But in the beginning, it was all people just cared. And 50 of the units are people who have not ever experienced homelessness, but they want to serve. Lots of rules and regulations. There's roads. People have to pay a small percentage of their income to get in. So if they have Social Security or other things, they have no income. They have opportunities to learn how to fish and do gardening, to work in the store. There's lots of service providers that come in, provide various counseling and drug use counseling, etc. But it's independent living. They have their own space, and they can do communal stuff when they want to. Hundreds and hundreds of units, right? They're probably going to be 1,500 units in the next few years. It's just on the the far boundaries of Austin, and there's a bus line that comes right to them. Medical services are accessible. So it's a really terrific model. It's the best model in the country. Dallas has a great model where they've got additional services right nearby. And that probably is recommended if you're doing this for a service-based audience. But we also need them just for affordable units, right? Yeah. Just affordable rental, affordable housing. That, as you talked about, there's a massive wealth disparity in this country, and it's mostly based on housing and generational wealth, the lack of it. So housing is one of those keys. So these homes can be built for under $100,000 and owned for under $100,000. It's your starter home, or it's your end home. But either way, it's an asset. Right,
exactly. And Generation Z right now is getting squeezed out of the game. And like you mentioned, a lot of the wealth gap had to do with who could buy a home. And in this city, redlining was really invented here. Chicago kind of was the center of the real estate industry. It was piloted here, and they literally drew red lines on maps, and the banks would look at the map and say, "Oh, I can't loan to you. You're in a community that is." That I can't get a loan for. And then we know what happened after that with the on-contract homes that were basically stolen from people. And so what a great, innovative design solution to not just housing inequity, but also, like you said, allowing people to get an asset that they can invest in, can grow with them. And I love the idea of putting as you get older and you want to downsize, put a tiny home in your backyard and rent out your front space, right. Your home. That's really interesting. And so what you said, when the Democrats win, there could be some new funding. What kind of timeline do you expect over the next, when will we hit a tipping point for tiny homes if everything goes your way?
In the Chicago area, I believe, and the city has its own budget crunch right now, right? So there's supposed to be an RFP. Lightfoot actually had $3 million in her budget for a pilot. So depending on how the city finds the money, there's supposed to be a request for proposals for 3 tiny home communities in Chicago, small communities. And so they'll be announcing that hopefully soon. HUD was at our summit, right? And they said there's a way to do this. Most city agencies and state agencies were represented at the summit in some way. The optimism that I heard this time was so different than 2016. So it's going to take developers, both private and nonprofit developers, to really be innovative about the plans that they put forth. A lot of them tell me that the scale of this doesn't make sense, right, for them. Where if they're for profit, right, that's one. So they're going to have to build the higher level. to make a profit, but the land ratio doesn't make sense. But that's in certain neighborhoods. In other neighborhoods, especially if the city's cooperative in providing, city and county has a ton of land, to make this viable, and to make the zoning code changes so that, let me just say example. So if we put 20 tiny homes, independent freestanding homes on 5 city lots, technically right now that means we need 20 hookups for gas and water and electric. That doesn't happen when you build a vertical building. So we need to get some changes in those codes, or at least aberrations that work when it's a tiny home community, because then the costs come down per unit. So I think in the next couple of years, especially when the Democrats win, and Harris has already said, and AOC has also said, that they want to put tremendous new resources into building new homes. The problem is private equity has totally bastardized our entire housing system. We need a rebellion at the government level, because private philanthropy and individual people cannot solve this. If the government puts money into building new housing solutions, we can build our way out of this.
Wow. Say that one more time, so in case people weren't listening. If the government, what? If
the government is committed to this, we can solve this. And the government can make its money back. Here's what I don't understand about the government. They're constantly lending our money out at 0%. For other people to make money. Why isn't the government, and why isn't CHA? CHA could make its money back if they spent the next 10 years building and sold those units, or did it on lease to own. And the same with the federal government. Why isn't there a private bank? Why are we giving our money out to for-profit places when we can make the money on, charge 3%, and the government will still make money?
So, what Tracy's talking about here, folks, is system change. Right? We can have individual change, but if we don't change the codes and the policies and the people that make the codes and the policies to represent what we want our future to be, it's not going to happen. Tracy, have you thought about getting into politics?
No, I would never run for office, because I would be one term, whatever that would be, including dog catcher, because I can't see compromising. I have a lot of friends who are political, and I am very empathetic to the fact that they are constantly compromising who they are. They need people like us on the outside agitating. And they tell us that, right? Obama said that about don't ask, don't tell. People were like, "Oh, we don't want to upset Obama in his first couple of years because he's got a lot to do." No, he wanted us out there picketing about don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah.
Because then he could go to his colleagues and say, "Oh, I have all these people agitating outside the White House. We need to pass this." And he passed. He got rid of don't ask, don't tell.
So what else are you agitating for right now?
I'm agitating for journalism funding.
Yes.
Let me just say, I am so excited about this new level of funding that's come into journalism. It's over $500 million. Started in Chicago. Press Forward came out of an idea from the MacArthur Foundation and Chicago Community Trust. They also partnered then with the Knight Foundation out of Miami. And there's now a national press forward, and there are 25 unique press forwards around the country, including in Alaska. There's one in Chicago. Windy City Times got some of the funding in the first round. In Chicago alone, it's $10 million to local journalism. Across the country, it's going to be over $500 million, and maybe even double that in the next few years. It's to provide innovation for solutions for journalism survival over the next couple decades. Again, in this case, private philanthropy will not be the solution, but it's a bridge to the next solutions about how we save journalism. So I'm passionate about tiny homes. I'm passionate about journalism. And then, of course, I've spent 40 years working in LGBTQ media. So I'm working on a project looking at 50 years of Howard Brown Health right now. It's going to be a book that comes out next year for their 50th anniversary. And so all three of those things, I think, are intertwined, both in my mind and in the world, right? Because housing affects everybody, including LGBTQ youth, seniors, everybody in between. Journalism is the through line of our whole society. It's the fourth estate. It's underfunded, underappreciated, and if it goes away, everything else is going to go away too.
And you said I'm looking at. Does that mean you're writing?
I am writing a history of Howard Brown's 50 years. I've interviewed, my team has interviewed over 130 people, and I'm looking back at 50 years of documents. And we're nearing the end of the research phase, and I start the writing next week.
Yay! And what is that exciting when you go from research to writing, or do you?
It's a little scary because I've never had this much material for a book. I've done 13 books, including on legends in the movement like Chuck Renslow, Jim Flynn, and Vernita Gray. But the amount of source material for Howard Brown Health, I don't even remember all the stories I wrote on Howard Brown. As I'm researching and looking up my own stories, so that's what scares me, is there's so much material. But it's also exciting because everything old is new again. You know, every controversy has happened before, every change. You look at how the hepatitis work that Howard Brown Health did led to understanding HIV/AIDS better, which led to the vaccine for COVID coming faster than it would have ever come if we hadn't had all that history. So I love looking at the entanglements of all of that.
So while I have you here, you know, can you also just share with us your overview of what's happened in the world of journalism and media? We've seen for-profit media become comical, and also hit a really hard time.
Well, large scale private equity and very corporate level for-profit media, I would say, is very different than like the Tribe, which is local and for-profit. You know, I did turn around the Chicago Reader into a nonprofit, but nonprofit is not the panacea. And for not every, like Windy City Times is not nonprofit, even though we never have one. There's not always the perfect model. You need to look at what works for that organization. And for the Chicago Reader, which had gone through so many different ownerships over the years, and then finally that huge twist at the end, where we had to wrestle it from one of the owners. The other owner was very supportive of converting it to nonprofit. That worked for the Reader. So to me, the solutions are multi-pronged and are going to take visionaries to fix it. This influx of philanthropy is terrific because it will also allow for some innovations. Chicago is an incredible incubator of great ideas for journalism solutions. We have wonderful local outlets like Cicero Independiente and La Raza and Block Club Chicago, City Bureau, you name it. We've got dozens and dozens of innovative new as well as legacy media here. So I like to use Chicago as an example of how things could work in other areas, but it's not always going to be a perfect match, right? We have a great journalism town. We always have had it. But where you have a Chicago Tribune that's owned by Alden Capital, they gut things for profit, and then they say they're losing money. They've made an intentional decision to destroy the media in this country. And the fact that the consolidation has caused a bunch of talking heads on TV to keep leaning righter and righter because of ownership, like Politico and other organizations. New York Times, I don't even know what happened to it. Like, it is really atrocious. Their take on things from trans issues, horrible, to the genocide. Like, there is no understanding how they have lost their way so much, and in terms of how they covered Trump versus how they covered Clinton's race with the emails that have been leaked. I would never work for the New York Times in this era. It was always kind of the holy grail for people when I graduated in 1984. They wouldn't have me because I was openly lesbian. But I'm glad I never took that road because it has gone really downhill. The solution to the survival of journalism is really local journalism and good national journalism that is not owned. ProPublica is unbelievable. They are now, to me, the North Star of what media can be. They are a nonprofit, and they are breaking stories that New York Times used to, Washington Post used to, TV used to. It is really sad that it's taken ProPublica to turn that industry back in the right direction, and we need more of them.
I mean, how do you reconcile with capitalism?
I think, well, first of all, there's no perfect type of politics, right? Socialism isn't perfect, all those things. None of it's perfect, right? We've had points in our history where regulations worked. Even Nixon put in regulations like the EPA, right? So when regulations are adequate and enforceable, and enforceable means that there's funding to check the meat at Boar's Head factory, when capitalists don't control the safety and the environmental issues, it can work. And I would not say I'm a capitalist in any way, shape, or form, but I'm a realist. And so let's take the models that have worked and regulated capitalism and highly taxed capitalism of the 1950s when 90% tax rates were the norm. That's when our society, outside of the racism, sexism, and homophobia, was working on a financial level, right? And so tweak the things that worked into policies again, and that includes high tax rates for corporations and individuals, and figure out a way to get back to the Citizens United getting the hell out of our laws, and so that corporations are no longer people. And I think we can go back to a better place. I don't know. I actually don't know if we have hope, because the lobbyists and the billionaires, the amount of concentration of wealth in this country is the worst it's ever been in recorded history and all history. So how do we get those soon-to-be trillionaires who control everything? I don't really know.
Well, if everybody that has some stake in the game voted, the politicians would slowly come to the people.
Well, you know what? Here's the thing that disappoints me constantly. I have voted in every single election, even its lesser of two evils, and this is not a case of that. I mean, while I don't agree on a huge thing associated with the current war happening, I will be voting for the Democrats. But this was a campaign that is primarily funded, from what I can tell, by the small people, small numbers, right? This was the campaign that could say no to these wealthy donors. No, because they have that kind of power. The most, I think, since Obama. And so why are they capitulating? I don't understand it. And why are they so afraid? There's nobody controlling them. They have the masses. And yet I keep hearing disappointing changes in policy ticking to the center. I'm hoping it's a political sway, and that once they're in office, that there's a tremendous resurgence of HUD and other government agencies and getting vouchers out of these pipelines in some of these states like Ohio that are going to destroy the public education one state at a time.
We're coming up on the 40th anniversary of Windy City Times. That must have been just hearing that 4 decades. I mean, what's that journey been like?
So I started at Gay Life newspaper in 1984. So this is 40 years for me. And then the next year I co-founded Windy City Times when I was 22. Oh my God. I would not have that. I don't think I would have that kind of call these days, but, I have built what I have done so that I could do what I love. So I helped create that and other gay newspapers so that I could do what I love, which is writing. And so when I was asked to take over the Chicago Reader in 2018, talk about surreal, Edwin Eisendrath first asked, he was going to give it to me for $1. And I said, Edwin, it's going to close tomorrow. I have no money. So finally they did find some funders. And then I took over 3 months later. And what a weird thing, right? Like, so the whole journey's been surreal. When I look back on it, I was on the farm team at Windy City Times, and then I got put in the big leagues with the Reader. And I used that platform immediately to try to get more resources into local journalism. I knew that part of it. And so I feel like I've fumbled forward, but in a very intentional way. Right? I'm a Title IX baby, so I benefited greatly from women's sports, and I think it taught me to be more confident and fearless maybe than prior generations were learned to be. And I had an amazing mother. You mentioned redlining earlier. My mother worked against redlining. She was a journalist too, but she worked for Dempsey Travis in the United Mortgage Brokers of America, which was the Black Mortgage Brokers Association, and she helped them write reports. And was kind of an assistant in that space, trying to fight redlining in Chicago and Gary.
And she worked at the Defender.
She worked at the Chicago Defender.
And I told you right before we started that Collaboration adapted the missing trial transcripts of the state of Mississippi versus the men who killed Emmett Till. In those transcripts, we found a moment when the defense lawyer was J.J. Breland, was, questioning Mamie Till. He said to her, now, Mamie, you live on the south side of Chicago. Is that right? And she said, yes, I do. She said, is it safe to say that you have a subscription to the Defender? And the courtroom went, ooh. And then the judge, I think it was, it was called into question, and the judge told him he couldn't do that. But basically, just saying the word "the Defender" in Mississippi just sent chills through these racists because they couldn't believe the power.
Well, that's because that was in the pre-internet world where the Pullman porters were the internet. They would take the Defender down south.
Right.
It was our a little bit of our X or Twitter of those days. It was a way they should have been afraid of the Chicago Defender. It was very powerful in its days.
And that's people say, "Oh, Mamie was so brave." I said, what I say is what I learned was that was the first great social media share.
Yep.
She was not just brave. She was smart, strategic, and genius that she could not just have an idea and an intuition, but tactically implement it in the face of not just death threats, but grieving the torture, kidnapping, and murder of her baby boy, who she didn't really want him to go to Mississippi, but she said, okay, you've been wanting to go with Uncle Mose and your cousins, and I'm going to let you go. And we have a 17-year-old, and all the time you go, okay, I'm going to let her take the blue line to school for the first time today. And just in the face of all of that, for her to have the brilliance to say, I want you to dig up my son. He was already in the ground. I'm bringing him back to Chicago. You're going to take a photo of what they did to him, and we're going to open the casket. And everybody along the way said, no, Mamie, no, Mamie, even her family. And she said, no, this is what we're doing because the world needs to see what happened to my boy and what racism did, the monster that is racism, did to Emmett. Mm-hmm. And she, we are in a different multiverse without her. And in Chicago, I think we're in a different multiverse without Tracy Baim. And
don't even put me in the same words with her.
Well, too late.
A true hero.
Have you heard the podcast Somebody? Mm-mm. Invisible Institute did it with iHeartRadio, and it's hosted and narrated by Chappelle Copeland, whose son was shot while driving his car, drove himself to the police station, and he was thereby handcuffed. As the victim of a shooting, they suspected that he was a perpetrator as a young black man in a BMW that he had bought himself. And it took a half hour for an ambulance to come, and then they handcuffed him to the gurney, and he died. And she started going and meeting with the police and recording the conversations, and she made an amazing podcast called Somebody. And I told her that she's the Mamie Till of podcasts, and that's maybe one day that'll be a Collaboraction project.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll do a Collaboraction project too. What else is coming up? We have the Pride Action Tank, which is just such a great name, has an upcoming summit October 1st and 2nd. Tell us about that.
It's related to HIV/AIDS aging, so you can check out AIDS Foundation of Chicago and Pride Action Tank for more information on that. We've also got an LGBTQ local media fundraiser day, national for local media that are around the country. It's givebutter.com/LGBTQ Equity Fund. It's to fund local LGBT journalism around the country.
And October 8th is a big day, isn't it?
Well, so that's October 8th. I apologize. So that's actually acknowledging the 100th anniversary of the first gay publication in the United States, which was actually out of Chicago, named Friendship and Freedom. It was produced by the organization Henry Gerber founded, and about 2 issues in, the police shut the organization down. So we're celebrating that 100th anniversary by trying to support local media around the country.
So we're getting into the second century of gay media. How great.
Yep.
And that headquarters was right here in Chicago in Old Town.
Yep. Henry Gerber's house was there. He was a postal worker. There was a few other men that founded the Society for Human Rights, the first gay organization known in the United States in 1924. They only lasted a short period of time, but he inspired later organizations like the Mattachine Society.
What do you do for fun?
I walk and play tennis, and I'm learning how to swim. I feel lucky, like I'm a hobbyist that gets to do it full time.
Well, keep on doing it. You seem to be full of energy, ideas, and action. So thank you for joining us on Collaboraction Radio. I hope we can do it again, and we can talk about the progress of tiny homes.
Thank you.
And the next 40 years of Windy City Times. That's Tracy Baim, everybody. She's got a lot of great books. So if you like her passion, wit, and zest for life, you can learn tons about her. She really is a Hall of Famer here on Collaboration Radio. Have a great week, everybody. It's Saturday, and it still feels like the summer in Chicago. So let's just pretend it like it is, and maybe we'll see you next week at Moonset Sunrise, and have a great Sunday, and then we'll do it all again next week.
The preceding program, Collaboraction Radio, is sponsored by
How'd I do? Did I do okay?
Did I do okay?
You did great. I was shit.